I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker today. Mary Dixon is a board member with the PW Litchfield Heritage Center, where she also chairs the Historic Preservation Committee and serves as a docent. She retired as the building official for the City of Litchfield Park. Prior to that, she served as the building official and fire marshal for the City of El Mirage and senior plans examiner for the City of Avondale. She has also taught architecture, drafting, blueprint reading, and computer-aided design at the high school and junior college level. Mary also does freelance design of custom homes and remodels and has over 500 projects in 7 states. So she knows her stuff, and we're really happy that she's here today. So please join me in welcoming Mary Dixon.
Thank you, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I will try to focus on talking right into this. So today we're going to cover a lot of information. I'm going to go over the history of Litchfield Park, how it started, a little bit about Mr. Litchfield himself, and then I'm going to talk about the new town concept. Now, I'm not a city planner, so I'm not going to use any big highfalutin planning verbiage or anything like that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of that because it really affected what happened in Litchfield Park. And I'm going to talk about how we evolved with that new town movement and where we're at today. And I'm going to end it with going over our historic buildings that we have in our community and what they're being used for now and in the future. So in order to talk about Litchfield Park, I have to talk about Mr. Litchfield, Paul Weeks Litchfield. He was born and raised in Massachusetts. He graduated from MIT with a degree in chemical engineering and came from a very affluent family. In fact, his family can trace themselves back to the Mayflower. So really strong roots. When he graduated from MIT, he got a position at a tire company in New York City, where he was fascinated with rubber, the rubber tires, and decided that he had to find a way that made the rides more comfortable. And so he actually holds the patent on pneumatic tires or air-filled tires. So Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in Ohio gets wind of this and says, we need this guy. And so they snag him up in 1904. He starts working for, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And he ended up staying with them his entire career. So around World War I, the United States isn't in the war quite yet, but Goodyear Tire had been getting their cotton that they used to hold the rubber together in the tires. Today we use steel belts. But back then they used cotton fibers to hold the rubber together, to bind it. And they've been getting it from Egypt. Well, with World War I going on, they were getting cotton from Egypt. The ships couldn't get through the Mediterranean, so they had to scramble. Also down south, where a lot of cotton was grown, they had a boll weevil infestation. So they had to scramble to find a place where they could grow some cotton and grow it quick. So he met with the Department of Agriculture and they steered him towards the Arizona desert. So he came out in 1916 and he ended up over in the Chandler area at first. He figured that, okay, Chandler's a little established. I'll be able to lease some land from farmers who are already there. There's workforces there, no problem. So he comes out only to find that the farmers weren't willing to just hand their land over to him. He was able to lease out or purchase some property there and got a little crop in, but he needed more. And so the Department of Agriculture steered him towards the West Valley, because out here, there had been a gentleman about a decade earlier who came out, and he came out from Riverside, California, wanting to grow citrus out here. So Mr. Kriegbaum came out here, and he had cleared some land already. He had already dug a canal that fed some water down to this area. He already had electric lines out here, so this was exactly what Mr. Litchfield needed. So he came out here, and the citrus crop, because of a really bad freeze, can you imagine a bad freeze here? It destroyed his crops. Apparently there were 3 days in a row with a really hard freeze, and his crops were gone. And there was some little infighting among some of his investors, and so they were more than willing to go back to California. So he purchased their property for, I think it was $25 an acre. Now that's not bad for already cleared land, but he eventually purchased up to 19,000 acres here in the West Valley and continued for several years to clear the land and start growing the cotton. So Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company started Southwest Cotton Company. It was one of the subsidiaries of Goodyear Tire and Rubber, and that was the cotton that was grown out here in the West Valley. So this is a picture of Litchfield Park, 1920-ish. If you look down in the lower right-hand corner, you will see a little canal. That's the airline canal that was dug by Mr. Kriegbaum. That canal still exists. If any of you golf the Wigwam, there's a little canal that runs through it. That's the original airline canal from 1910. So this is a view from the airline canal looking southwest. You can see there's really just little one-room shacks that people were living in. If you look at the one in the foreground, it's a tent. This is what they lived in for many years, and it served as, their stores, their school, their churches. And there were just canvas tents. You rolled up the sides. This is a picture of the center of town. The flagpole sits right in the center of town, and it still sits there today. So if you've been to Litchfield Park, you can orient yourself a little bit. This picture is looking to the northeast. Please look at the palm trees that are starting to line the roads and how little they are. And right there is what was called the organization house. And because Mr. Litchfield, he was just a plant supervisor when he was hired at Goodyear Tire, and came out here in Arizona and was put in charge of this big operation out here. So his supervisors came out periodically to see what was going on out here, and they needed a place to stay. So they built this little organization house, and it only slept 6 people. So we're not talking a very large lodge or anything like that. But it at least gave them somewhere to stay. Avondale was the closest town, and even it was pretty small at the time, and it was a full day ride into Phoenix, so they needed some place to stay here. So Mr. Litchfield said, okay, we need to find some organization here to this little town site. The post office wanted to start mail delivery. They needed to come up with a name for this little community. And so Mr. Litchfield went to his supervisors and said, what should we name this place? We got to have a name for the post office to deliver mail. And he goes, name it after yourself. It's not going to amount to anything anyway. So they started calling it Litchfield, and the post office didn't like that. It sounded too much like a town in northern Arizona. And so they went back and forth for many years. And finally, in 1926, the post office threw the name Park after it, and that's how Litchfield Park became Litchfield Park. So Mr. Litchfield, he also purchased a little bit north of the center of town, about a mile north. He purchased some property for himself. He liked the climate out here, especially in the wintertime, and decided to build himself a little cottage out here. But this is a plat showing the center of town. Now, if you look at the cross, that's where the flagpole is at. And he hired Leighton Knipe, who was a very well-known architect and planner at that time. he had come out to the Phoenix area, and he hired Mr. Knight to do a little town site layout, just so that there was some rhyme and reason to their growth. Well, at this particular time, there was a movement going on called, Garden Cities, and Mr. Knight apparently was influenced by the Garden City movement. So if you look at the upper right-hand quarter of this map, I don't have any way to point at it, unfortunately. You will see that it looks like a half circle radiated. He's got a lot of curves in there, and this is very typical of a Garden City layout. The rest of the town had already started forming itself, so it was kind of already set in stone, but he had a little bit of free play there, and he went with this. And at this time, Mr. Litchfield said, okay, we need to make this a beautiful place for people to live. You saw the previous picture, it was pretty stark. So they started planting the palm trees, and pepper trees lined the streets, and eventually they added orange trees in it too. And so the quote down at the bottom, of course, is great. It costs a little more to make anything beautiful rather than merely functional. And that really sums up Litchfield Park. So what was this Garden City movement? So now I'm going to jump over to Great Britain. There was a group of urban planners at the time who were trying to think of ways to improve the quality of life of the people who lived in these towns. And so Ebenezer Howard was the one who actually put it into book form, and so he's given all the credit for the Garden City movement. And the Garden City movement, because it started in Great Britain, the other countries that it kind of fanned out to, of course, England had their touches in that, especially Australia, the Mideast, Asia, and Europe. So let's take a look at this. This is just one little pie wedge of the Garden City layout. So you have to figure this as a total circle, okay? But we're now looking at just one little wedge of it. And this would be called a village. And in this particular village, at the very center point, would be all the city hall, the museums, all the cultural areas would be at that hub. Radiating out from it would be a park, just to separate again. And then the residential areas are the ones that are in kind of the pinky color. Around the very perimeter of this circle would be your industrial areas where people actually would work. But within that little residential village area, you would have your churches and your schools and your housing and all different types of housing, not just single family. So the concept was you never really had to leave your village unless you had to go into City Hall, to go to the hub or go to the outskirts to work in one of the commercial areas out there. So it created a nice little, actually a village. And this is, I don't remember the name of this town that the picture is taken from. But the Garden City movement, they were trying to take care of all of the urban or the rural flight into the urban areas and the chaos of the urban growth. And we still see that chaos happening today. So here is a picture of downtown London, and the reason people were leaving the farm was the industrial age has been going on for 100 years already. So people were flocking to the cities, populations were becoming very dense, and you can look all you want in this picture and you will not see a tree, a flower, nothing. And so this is what the Garden City movement said, is there needs to be a nice balance between people and nature, and that was what was the problem with all of the ills of the urban areas, is that people had that disconnect with nature. So people left, of course, because it was year-round work. It wasn't seasonal. They didn't have to really struggle to put food on the table, but it created very overcrowded areas and populations. pollution, crime, everything we still see today. So that by 1900, there were 5 million people in London, which was a lot. And the Garden City people said, we need to create more garden cities to get at least 1 million people out of London. So they went to Parliament and they were granted monies to create some garden cities. So the very first garden city is Letchworth Garden City that Ebenezer Howard was starting in 1903. Now, he didn't start it from scratch. He found an area where there were already 3 existing villages that he could very easily incorporate into his garden city design. So Letchworth was made up of 3 separate villages. And it was laid out so that it would provide jobs and services and all types of housing for anybody who wanted to come out and live there. But the key thing was to keep that quality of life. So this is a current picture of Letchworth Garden City. So it still exists today, and it is noted because it is the location of the very first roundabout. There was a second one, Welwyn, that also went in, and these are both about, maybe a half-hour ride outside of London. And so they were going strong with the first 2 garden cities, and then World War I starts. And so that kind of put the halt to that. So during World War I, there was what they called the Blitz that took place, where bombing happened all throughout London. Now, the bombing was done mostly by the dirigibles, so there was no radar. The planes at the time couldn't go all the way across the channel and then get to London and bomb and then make it back to land. So they used the dirigibles. So the accuracy left a lot to be desired. So the damage that was done, though it was significant, it wasn't earth-shattering for London itself. There was about 2,000 people that lost their lives because of the bombing. And so by this time, this group that was doing the garden cities, building these new towns all over the place, that term just started clicking. And so people started calling them the new townsmen. So that's where the new town name comes into. They made the mistake of starting the next several cities too close to already urban areas. And so what happened was it just contributed to the sprawl that was already there. So it kind of defeated their purpose. And in the United States, we will make that same mistake 60 years later. So in the mid-30s, there was a new prime minister, Barlow, who wanted to do a commission report on exactly that issue. We have too much urban population. We need to get them out and move industry out into the more rural areas and move the populations away. But Parliament argued about it and no one could reach any kind of conclusion. And so it was kind of put on the shelf. And then World War II starts. So now they're in another World War 20 years later, and they still haven't gotten the major population out of London. But World War II would be extremely favorable for the new town movement. So in World War II, there was another blitz. This time they had long-range airplanes, they had radar, so their targeting was very accurate. They did aerial assaults for 9 months. I think there were 2 days where there were not bombing going on. So can you imagine 9 months straight of bombing going on? They tried to attack the urban areas, places where people worked, where they would get their food, where industry and trade would take place. And most of all, they wanted to deflate the morale of the people of Great Britain. So I love the picture of the people down in the tube. There was so much bombing, so much destruction, that the only place they could get away when the air raid sirens went off was to go down into the subway systems. And so they would spend hours, if not days, down in the subway system. When World War II ended, this is the casualties that took place. But the one I want you to make note of most is the 2 million homes were destroyed or damaged, the majority of which were in London. So again, they found themselves in this really serious situation of a dense population, high casualties. We need to get at least 1 million people out of London because this can happen again in another 20 years. So they revived that Barlow Commission report. Parliament said, yes, let's do this now. And they passed some legislation back to back that would provide funding for new towns to be created. Now, one interesting thing in Great Britain, they didn't treat these new towns, they didn't hire or elect mayors or assemblymen or council members or anything like that. They ran them as corporations, and they still do. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So you'll notice that the new town is kind of a little different shape. It's not so rigid in design anymore, but it still has the same components of those garden cities. It has that center hub of the town. It has roads radiating out from it. It's got the individual villages. And then, of course, lots of green areas. And I think this is Edinburgh or something like that. And again, lots of varieties of housing, not just single family, not just apartments, a little bit of everything. But now, because of that less rigid circular design, they could now take into account the natural terrain of the land, where there were hills, where there were rivers, and that type of thing. So this is a map of England now. And they have 32 new towns, which is just fabulous. They managed to get 2.8 million people out of urban areas. Of course, London now has 8 million people in it, but they're still working on them. Now, the ones with the stars are run by corporations, and the ones with the squares are run under the control of the National Committee on New Towns, for lack of a better way to word it. So quite a few there. But let's hop back to here. Litchfield Park is still owned and run by Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, along with all of those 19,000 acres that Mr. Litchfield had purchased for Goodyear Tire. So during the war, there was going to be a great need for aircraft parts. And so he had the foresight to say, let's get a plant down there. We're not using all of this property for farming anymore. Cotton was still being used for tires up until the 50s, actually. But it wasn't quite such a demand. But the population had increased. They had all those workers out here that needed to be fed. So a lot of it went to farming. And Goodyear Farms had been created, yet another subsidiary of Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Keep remembering all these little subsidiaries I mentioned, because in the 80s, this is going to be an issue. So down Litchfield Road, close to the tracks where there was the railroad station, he built a plant that was Goodyear Aircraft, a huge manufacturing facility. They manufactured airplane parts, like I said, a lot of the plastic parts. They also built the blimps down there. They had women who, sewed the blimps together. But I like the big picture in particular, because in the foreground it shows a little U shape, and this is a trailer park that was built for the employees. And there's also one to the north of it as well, or to the right on this. They needed housing for all these employees that were working in this Goodyear aircraft plant. You can see all the cars there. Not everyone was going to commute from Phoenix, because it was still a long ride from Phoenix. So there were some articles in the paper about the trailer park, and you'll notice the trailer park has got a lot of lush landscaping. Again, Mr. Litchfield's influence on making things beautiful rather than just functional. And then in the area of Western Avenue and Litchfield Road to the northeast are these cute little houses. They're still there today, and most of them still look exactly like this. They were just shy of 1,000 square feet, single carport. Some of them had little garages, but cute little housing, quick to put up, and it started populating the area that was going to become Goodyear. They also used the Goodyear plant behind it as an airstrip, and there was a naval air facility there, and they also needed housing. So also in that area of Western and Litchfield Road, just north, there is a little community. It's called Park Shadows now, but that was actually naval housing. So if you drive down that area, and you'll see there's fencing around it, that was there back in the 40s. So again, more population coming down to the Goodyear aircraft area. Avondale, this is a horrible picture, and I apologize for it, but it's like the only one I could find. We're looking down on it, and over to your right, you will see what's Dicer Avenue. You can see the railroad track and MC 85, which is the Buckeye Road, paralleling each other diagonally across there. But you can see that even in Avondale, there was no asphalt. Even in 1949, they had not paved the streets yet. But this was the biggest town to Litchfield Park, closest to it. And now let's go back to Litchfield. So here we are. If you look down in the lower section of the picture is the intersection of the two main streets. That's where the flagpole sits. There's a little L-shaped shop, backwards L. That is the downtown area. There's a grocery store, doctor's office, that type of thing. And then you can see that Garden City wedge is the main body of the picture. Down in the very lower center would be the city or the community hall. Going a little over to the right, you would see the school. Now in the very, if you go across from the words Litchfield Park, you can see that organization house. The organization house in 1929 had grown in size because more and more Goodyear executives were coming out to stay, especially in the wintertime. So in 1929, they actually opened to the public, and they named it the Wigwam. Okay, in the 1950s, we have more employee housing that's going on, and these can be found along Wigwam Boulevard and on Palm Street just south of it. And these were a little bit larger than the ones that were done in Goodyear. Little brick houses are real cute, and we're real fortunate that when people have remodeled these houses, they have retained the flavor of what they looked like. They haven't totally modified it. Then to the north of these employee housing, custom homes started going up. Some of them were along the golf course to start with, and then they filled in between. And then in 1959, Mr. Litchfield passes away. He had gone from a plant supervisor in 1904 to becoming the president of the company in the 20s. And he continued in that position for a long time, and then became, past president and CEO. He retired in October of 58, and he passed away in March of 59. So he gave the majority of his life to Goodyear Tire and Rubber and to Litchfield Park. So The Newtown movement was going strong in Great Britain, as I pointed out, but it took it a long time to get to the United States. Don't know exactly why, but in the middle of the 60s, Lyndon Johnson created HUD, Housing and Urban Development Department, and lots of funding was available now to create new communities. And so the Newtown movement kind of caught on a little bit. And in the 70s, they actually had a new communities program. And in it, 14 new towns were started with government funding, 13 of which failed. Now, some of them, there was quite a few of them in Texas, but they built too close to already urban areas, the mistake that they made by London. And it just contributed to the urban sprawl. There were others that just, for one reason or another, they couldn't attract the work, the industry, and therefore couldn't attract the people. There was one that actually survived. It's in Minnesota. So it cost the government nearly $1 billion in today's money, and so they shut that program down. But where the government funding failed, we had some success with privately funded developments. And so in Reston, Virginia, and it's about 45 minutes west of Washington, D.C., there's a town that Robert Simon created, thus the RES of Reston. And what he did is he purchased a plantation and all the property around the plantation and created his new town. This city today, if you're reading an article on great places to live, best quality of life, all of that, Reston, Virginia will be listed on there to this day. In Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, James Rouse, he had a little harder time acquiring property because he was buying individual properties. And so it took him years just to acquire the land he needed to create his new town. But in here you can see with the different colors, the different villages that he has created. West of the Mississippi, there are only two. And Irvine, California is one of them. And it was a ranch. So the Irvine Company purchased the ranch and created their new town. Now, if you go to Irvine today, they actually will give you architectural and planning tours of the town and discuss the new town movement. And then we have Litchfield Park. In 1963, it was the planning stages for what was to become a new town in Arizona. And so Litchfield Park Properties, subsidiary of Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, remember we're still a company town here, made some headways into creating a new vision for what is now Litchfield Park. So they hired Victor Gruen. He was hired by Howard Hyde, who was a Goodyear vice president at the time. Remember, Mr. Litchfield had just passed away years before, and Howard Hyde happened to be married to one of his daughters, so he was a VP. And Victor Gruen is a very well-known architect, city planner. He happened to be in Phoenix at the time. He did several projects here, and he was hired by Goodyear Tire to come out and do a new plan for Litchfield Park. Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company had been telling the community that you need to start thinking about becoming a town on your own. You're not going to be able to be a company-run town forever. And so the conversation had started about establishing a town. And so this was a way to create that particular town. So we have Litchfield Properties and Litchfield Land and Development Company. So now we have two more subsidiaries of Goodyear Tire and Rubber out here. But Mr. Hyde also put together the team that made it happen. And so this is the team. We have, over on the left, we have Pat Cusick, and in the center is Mike Cartonis. And we don't know who the other gentleman is, unfortunately. In the back, pinned up on the wall, you can see the master plan that Victor Gruen came up with, and we'll look at that in just a second. Now, Mike Cartonis actually stayed with the city until his retirement. He also taught at Arizona State for many, many years, urban planning. So these two gentlemen really did all of the planning and implementation to make this new town work. So this is what Victor Gruen came up with. I'll let you look at it for a second. It was going to be 15 square miles. It was going to go from Dysart Road to Cotton Lane, from Camelback down to McDowell. He wanted a central commercial core, so that's running down the very middle of it. In that central core, of course, would be places for people to work, to shop. There was also going to be an extension of Arizona State out there. Now it is Estrella Community College. But what they did, you see the roads that are in this 15 square mile perimeter. They have gotten away from just the long, straight roads that we have in the Phoenix metro area. So you can get on Indian School Road out in Scottsdale, and you can just lock the wheels of your car and just drive for 40 miles straight. This is what they did not want. They did not want you to drive past backs of people's yards with little roads going into residential areas, hitting an intersection where you see grocery stores and a gas station and then the same thing over and over and over. So what they did is they took those roads and they curved them around so that the villages could be in between these areas, so that the heavily trafficked roads were not going through the centers of the villages. If you look down at the very bottom horizontal road, that is the I-10. You can see it says that it's the highway to Los Angeles. You can see the little interchanges. The next horizontal line up is McDowell. Then you have Thomas Road is the next one up, and Indian School. So all of the commercial core is between Thomas and Indian School. And if you think about it, there is quite a bit of that had been started back in the 60s and early 70s, and it's still there. One thing, and it took me a little while to see this, but in the very center, and I hope you're going to be able to pick it out, if you're starting over on the left-hand side, it is actually the third road going north-south. You see that it kind of cuts up and then it continues on. I figured out that was the 303. Because it's not one of the main roads. It is something additional to it. And I'm thinking, this was done in 1963. This guy was brilliant to be able to look that far in the future. Now, it's not exactly in this location now, but just to have that foresight that this would be needed, 60 years later, it was just amazing, amazing. So there were going to be 25,000 houses in this area, enough industry and commercial for people to sustain a living out here, so you didn't have to commute. And if you did have to commute, you just hop on the 10 and in 15 minutes you're in Phoenix. That was a joke. There were going to be schools, churches, and everything inside of each individual village. Again, you don't have to leave your village unless you absolutely need to. So how do they create this new town? First, remember those roads? They had to curve those roads. So the big picture is looking a little bit above where Albertsons is at. So this is Dysart and Indian School. You can see where Indian School just went straight. And so this is mid-construction where they start to curve Indian School to the south. You can see at the very top of that picture, over on the left-hand side is that company housing along what's now Wigwam Boulevard, and then the custom homes to the north of that. But you can see that there's other housing that's going in at this particular time. So rerouting that main road was a huge project, but it was crucial for that new town concept to get that traffic out of the way. They also put utilities underground, and this was something novel at the time, but it really made a visual difference in the community not to have these ugly poles all over the place. They also created a variety of housing types. So we have apartments, condos, townhouses, all mixed throughout the community. They also decided they needed a little facelift. The one over on the left was what the town looked like at the time. So kind of little plain Jane looking exteriors of our downtown buildings. And so they hired Benny Gonzalez. Now, how many have heard of Benny Gonzalez? Oh, okay, you need to Google this guy. He is probably the best known Arizona architect that we have produced yet. He was one of the first 2 Hispanics to graduate from Arizona State College of Architecture. He grew up in Nogales. I don't think he was born in Nogales, but he grew up and lived there and actually died there too. Very well known for his Southwest styling. And so he added the arches and the arcades over the front of what we now have in Litchfield Park. We also are blessed to have at least one house that we have identified as having been designed by Benny Gonzalez in the city itself. He also had impact into creating our rec center. And you notice the 3 lights with the globes on the top. That is from Benny Gonzalez, and it represents family. And it's the closest thing Litchfield Park has to public art currently. So hopefully that will change. But you'll still see these all throughout the downtown area. They also created a lake. Again, just open areas for people to enjoy. So they built a lake. A little business park to the south side of what's now called Wigwam Boulevard. And if you look amongst all those trees way over on the right-hand side, you'll see Benny Gonzalez's light sculptures as well. And those are still there. This held medical offices. There were some businesses in there. There was also our first library was in there. This Newtown movement, remember the 2 gentlemen who helped create this? They did heavy promotion on this. So there's several different articles that were in Life magazine. I mean, full page, some of them are 2-page articles on this Newtown movement and Litchfield Park, Arizona. So they advertised nationally on this. There's a Reader's Digest article that came out highlighting the Newtown movement, and they highlighted Reston, West Virginia, Columbia, Maryland, and Litchfield Park, Arizona. And I have a copy of it on the back table if you want to look at it later. But again, this was a really hot topic in the mid to late 60s. And so it was an honor for little tiny Litchfield Park to be in a national magazine. And this is a little segue, but even Walt Disney was caught up in the Newtown movement. He designed Epcot Center after a Newtown layout. He has the center museums and everything as the core, and then the different villages that radiate out from it are the different nations, if you've been to Epcot Center. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So 1963, Victor Gruen is hired. He comes up with this great map. The city goes through, changes the roads, puts the utilities underground, starts creating some promotions for this new town. And by 85, the population had more than tripled, so it was working. But in 1986, everything came to a halt. So the first thing that happened, now he died in 66, but still his impact of his death was felt clear at that time. Howard Hyde had passed away. Now remember, he was a son-in-law of Litchfield, and he's the one who hired Victor Gruen and created this new town. But more importantly is that direct family connection of the Litchfields to Litchfield Park was gone. So there was now no one at Goodyear Tire and Rubber directly connected to Litchfield Park. That I-10 that was going to be done by the 60s, yeah, it took it a little longer than they thought. So that really impacted people who had to commute. So people really hesitated to come this far out, and it was this far out. There wasn't the employment yet out this way. It was going to come, but it still really had an impact on this particular area. And not just Litchfield Park, but the whole Newtown area. But this guy, he was the big problem that happened. Sir James Michael Goldsmith, he would describe himself as a financier. Other people would call him a corporate raider or an asset stripper. Now, an asset stripper buys companies and then sells off little pieces of it. He started looking at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company to maybe take it over. He liked to find companies that had lots of little subsidiaries. Think of what we had out here. Southwest Cotton Company, Goodyear Farms, Goodyear Aircraft, Goodyear Aerospace had also come out here. Litchfield Properties, Litchfield Land and Development Company. There was a lot of subsidiaries out here. But the one that grabbed his eye was the aerospace. He thought, what does a tire company need with aerospace? And so he set his sights on taking over Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, stock-wise. And Goldman Sachs had warned Goodyear Tire that this guy was looking at them, that they needed to be very cautious. And so what Goodyear Tire did was, in that early fall, September, early October, they held big, huge promotions in Akron, Ohio. This is your company town. You are Goodyear Tire and Rubber. There was some legislation going on at the time that would prevent corporate takeovers, but nothing had been happening yet. So they held a huge open house, and that's the picture where the blimp is in it. Over 300,000 people came out in one day to go through the Goodyear plant and to be able to touch the blimp. And they did huge media blitzes everywhere. They tried to really get all of Ohio to rally around Goodyear Tire because they see it coming, something's coming. They also got wind that Mr. Goldsmith had an aversion to rubber bands. Okay, you get it. The irony of someone who wants to take over a rubber company not liking rubber bands. So what they did is they posted his address in the paper and encouraged people to mail rubber bands to his Manhattan apartment. He received over 1 million rubber bands. And he goes, why do these people hate me so much? He had no idea, the impact he was having on this business. So on October 16th, he made his first purchase, only a mere 88,000 shares of stock. And by the end of October, he'd accumulated almost 12% of the company. And so this really drew everyone's attention that something was serious. So in these pictures that I posted here, this is a hearing that was being done at the legislature, and he actually showed up for it. And afterwards, the news camera got him, and people were yelling and screaming at him, and he started snipping back. Well, he saw himself on the news, and he said, I'm a monster. And the next day he started negotiating to sell the stocks back. So he had a heart there somewhere. So he decides to sell for $670 million. So in a matter of 2 weeks, he made 92 mil. Not bad. He was not happy because his goal was to break up the company and all its subsidiaries. He felt it was better for the stockholders to have a pure company, not one with a lot of little diversions. So he was very upset, was not happy with his 92 million. So what does Goodyear Tire have to do to get, you just don't sit down and write a $670 million check. They have to start selling some of their assets. So they sold everything in Arizona. So all of their Goodyear farms, all of the Southwest Cotton, the Goodyear aircraft, Goodyear Aerospace, all of it was sold. And Pinnacle West paid $221 million for all of those holdings. That included even the Wigwam Resort. Now, you may have heard of some of the subsidiaries of Pinnacle West, Suncor, who is still big in the West Valley, and APS, which we all know. Suncor said that they were going to continue the Newtown movement because it was very popular and it was very successful, but that didn't happen, unfortunately. So here's Litchfield, no longer a company town, no longer, still not a town. Goodyear and Avondale had their act together. They had incorporated back in '46, and they were starting to encroach into this area. With the new town concept forgotten, Litchfield had to do something quick. And so they incorporated that very next year and was officially now a town. However, they were restricted with just the land that they had. So this is a current planning map for Litchfield Park. And you can see the curved roads where they moved not only Indian School Road, but they moved Litchfield Road as well. That's why it bows out. The colored areas represent the density of the housing. So the darker the color, the more dense the housing. So the darker colors would be the condos, the apartments, townhouses, that type of thing. The greens are all parks. This is all that's left, is that one little village that was known originally as Tierra Verde. There is let me see if I can go back. There is a road that starts right where the word West Camelback is in the center by the yellow. There's a road that meanders south, goes over towards the east and kind of goes along Dysart Road a little bit. Then it curves around the back side of the golf course on the south and curves through the housing, ends up over by the lake on Litchfield Road. And that road is called Villanueva or Newtown. So this is Litchfield today. We went from that 15 square miles dream of a new town down to 3.3 square miles. That flagpole still sits in the middle of town. But we're still benefiting from that new town planning because Litchfield Park has a very definite feel to it. If you've been there, spent any time there, you know that it's different. We have got, area-wise, we have massive amounts of open space. We have 3 golf courses within this 3.3 square miles, 3 golf courses thanks to the Wigwam. But we also have 13 parks, the majority of which are large enough to have baseball fields, soccer fields, or even a lake in the middle of them. So that's a lot of green area. And I'm not even talking about the landscaped medians and the side roads and things like that. We have miles of golf cart and bike paths because in the new town concept, you're not going to leave your village. So just hop on a bike or an electric cart and drive to where you need to go within your little village. But we still have a very vibrant downtown. You know, you pull into Litchfield Park, just about any road in, within feet, you're going to be hit with lush landscaping. You kind of calm down, blood pressure decreases, has just a nice slower feel to it. People walk the streets, walk their dogs, they jog, they ride their bikes. People say hi to each other. The dogs know each other. It's really, yeah, our dogs know each other. It's a very different feel, thanks to that new town concept. And fortunately, as Litchfield Park grew, it maintained that new town feel. They didn't plow over the golf cart paths because they were too much money to maintain or anything like that. They grasped it and ran with it. So this is a picture from one of the old brochures, and it took me a while to find it, but I found the same path. The golf cart paths are great. People have embraced the golf cart culture. I think there's more golf carts per capita in Litchfield Park than probably any other city other than Sun City. People take them to take their kids to and from school rather than drive. It's just, again, it's that little relaxed atmosphere. And that little organization house, this is what it looked like with the 6 sleeping areas in it. And then, of course, the Wigwam Resort today. The Wigwam did receive an award for being the best historic hotel in, I think it was the United States, in 2020. We're going to be reaching out to them for historic designation because that original organization house still exists. If you go into the lobby of the Wigwam, where there are the wood floors, that's the original organization house. And so we need to get them on board with getting that preserved. And it's amazing with all the renovations they have done over the years that they haven't destroyed that original organization house. Southwest Cotton Company built a cute little adobe place on Wigwam Boulevard, and over the years it evolved into Goodyear Farms, and today it is now Litchfield City Hall. The city manager has given the museum their blessing for us to pursue historic designation on all of their city buildings. So this is one of them that we are going to be working on. The rec center, if you look real close, you'll see some of those Benny Gonzalez family sculptures in there. The rec center is still a very vibrant part of the community. This is a picture of one of the dive-in movies. So very well used. The lake, this is a picture from one of the early brochures, obviously, because there's nothing in the background. And now there's houses and townhouses and things all along it. But the day I went out to take this picture as my granddaughter, there were 5 families out there fishing, and little picnic baskets and blankets spread out, and it was really nice. So it does get used, and it is definitely appreciated. Now, when Mr. Litchfield had his workers, a lot of them came up from Mexico, and he had great respect for their culture and their religion. So he had a church built on the corner of what's now Neolin and Wigwam. And the cornerstone says 1919, but at that time, the Spanish flu was really hitting hard. And it took quite a few years to finish it. So it wasn't finished until 23. Because of the Spanish flu, though, There is a Goodyear Farms Cemetery in Avondale, just south of Indian School Road on Rancho Santa Fe Boulevard. If you haven't seen it, you need to stop by and look at it. That's where a lot of these workers who got the flu or passed away naturally also are buried. And if you can trace your roots back to one of the Goodyear Farms workers, you can still get buried there. Today, the church, unfortunately, sits empty. We haven't found a good use for it, but this is also one of the buildings that the museum is going to be working on for historic designation. We do open it up once a year, at least for our Las Posadas in December. And this is a picture from last year's Las Posadas. This past weekend, there was a huge clap of thunder. I mean, it was big, it was real close. And my first thought was it hit the church. But it didn't. It hit the palm tree right in front of the church. So we're very fortunate we didn't lose the steeple on this. So this was the original St. Thomas. So if anyone here goes to St. Thomas, this was the original mission church. Now the downtown block, these buildings are all adobe, by the way. It was constructed, and this picture is somewhere between 1918 and 1920. And so this is where the grocery store was and some medical offices as well. And of course, what it looks like today, restaurants galore and very, very busy. Then we have Aunt Mary's house, and that is our museum. So if you have not been to our museum, you need to stop in. You will get more history per square foot out of this building than you will in any other museum in Arizona. It's jam-packed, and the docents are all great and very knowledgeable. So come in and learn more history of the Southwest Valley. But the big thing is Mr. Litchfield's property, Rancho La Loma. Up on the hillside, north of Camelback, just west of Litchfield Road, sits his homestead. And it contains his main house, which he considered a cottage, and according to his house in Ohio, it definitely is a cottage. There were 3 other cottages. One has burned down. One was his personal office. There is a water reservoir up there. It held 325,000 gallons of water and provided water for all of Litchfield Park for quite a long time. The bandstand is in the picture on the top. They would hold not entertainment per se, but more like devotionals, lecture thing, that type of thing, up on the hill, and thousands of people would come out to this. So this was a huge area. And then, of course, the picture of the house. There was a pool. It has been filled in. And over on the west side of the hillside is Sunset Terrace. And this is where they would go in the evenings. There was a little ramada there. Termites took care of it, though, unfortunately, where they could sit and watch the sunset over the White Tank Mountains. This hillside is one of 3 points in the entire Valley of the Sun where you can go to the top of the hill and have a 360-degree view. The other one is Wrigley's Mansion out near Paradise Valley. The other is Tovray Castle down by the airport, and Rancho La Loma. That's it. So very special, which is why we want to save it. And so it will be someday our new museum location. It will give us more than 4 times the square footage for display space, even in just phase 1. And so we hope to be moving forward on that. Arizona Farm and Ranch plan on taking over the cottages to use for their offices and for their Hall of Fame museum. And we also have the old Avondale Train Depot that has been sitting in Goodyear's Public Works yard for at least a decade that I know of. It was out on someone's ranch before that. They're going to be moving that up to the hill as well. So we'll have a nice little cultural area up at the top of the hill eventually. So hopefully you can come and enjoy that. And I love this picture. This was taken at one of our concerts in the park. If you haven't been to Litchfield, you're so close, there's no excuse why you haven't been there. Come and drive around and enjoy it. Stop at our museum and pick up a walking tour of Litchfield Park. And hopefully in the fall, we'll be giving actually docent-led tours, and watch also for docent talks at the fireside room inside the wigwam. So watch for those as well. And with that, thank you.